Okay, we are now talking about Restoration and Augustan literature. We know the reason why we call it the Restoration period. We studied it talking about Charles II and James and William and Mary of Orange. But we probably don't know what is the meaning of Augustan literature, why it is called Augustan. Because the Augustan period in the Roman Empire was particularly positive for the place, for Rome. It was a period of peace. It was a period of arts and culture. And for this reason, as in England, this period of after the Restoration was particularly positive for the new discoveries, scientific discoveries, for the new importance given to arts and literature and refinement and life. And it was also the period in which the important middle class rose. They decided to give Augustan Age as the name of this period, to indicate this period. And it is particularly interesting notice that in this portrait we see a woman, and she is probably reading a book. This is the symbol of the other great change that took place in this period, because a lot of women from the middle class started to be able to read and appreciated, enjoyed reading, and there was the new introduction, the new rise of a new literary genre, which is the novel. The Augustan Age was a period of, as I told you, of political stability, because England for a long period didn't have so many wars, or wasn't shocked, or we can say disturbed by the wars. It was also an age of individualism, because people were particularly interested in taking care of their own wealth, their own social and economical position. So everyone was interested in his own life. It was also the period of free will and liberal thought, and from this point of view there was a great contribution of philosophers who gave rise to a new way of thinking, which was based on freedom and on the possibility to have opinions, personal opinions. It was also an age of optimism, characterized by new scientific discoveries, new innovations, and these gave the hope of the power of reason. In fact, as you can see, the reason is the other element of this age. This is also the reason why it is called, also as in Italy, Illuminismo. It was called in England the Enlightenment. It was also the period of common sense, in which the idea of common sense became stronger. The common sense was the way people behaved, even if there were no rules, no laws. So according to the other people did. There was also a new desire for balance, for symmetry and refinement, so they appreciated beauty and the equilibrium, refinement, symmetry. It is the period in which also there is a new revival of the old arts, the old form of arts. The reading public. The reading public, as there was a development, a new rise of a new development of the middle class, there was, of course, development, an incredible development, and of the reading public. Most of the readers were women, and they belonged, of course, to the middle class. Why to the middle class? Because in the higher sphere, in the higher social class, which was nobility, they were already able to read. But the real innovation was in the middle class, not in the lower class, because the women belonging to the lower social class, they couldn't, first of all, they couldn't read, they didn't have any forms of literacy, and moreover, they didn't have enough time because they had to work. Another important element was the creation, the appearance of the circulating libraries. In the past, people had to buy books, and they were often very expensive. In this period, they were less expensive because of the introduction of the printing technique, but they also had the possibility to borrow books. There were circulating libraries moving in the city and giving books for very little money. So it was also possible to this opportunity, this chance. And also the presence of coffee houses improved the reading public. What were the coffee houses? They were places where people met, in particular, of course, middle class or higher social class people. They met there. They were artists, painters, and poets and writers, or scientists or politicians. They met there. They had a cup of coffee. They discussed. They talked about new topics, new ideas, philosophers. And it was also the place where they could find the newspapers. So they were also places where they could read from the new entries, which were the newspapers and the magazines. Also, of course, the reading public, so the interest was mainly for the novel and for journalism. We are not talking about journalism now, but we are going to talk about that later. We are concentrating on the novel. The novel was the new entry of the period because it was particularly similar to the middle class life. In a novel, they could find the exaltation of reason, the power of reason, and the exaltation of human skills, human abilities. So it was particularly appreciated. And the novelist, for the first time, is a job, is no more, I don't know what, but is a real job. And the novelist is differently from the past, from the writers, the poets and playwrights in the past. The novelist is the spokesman of the middle class, il portavoce della classe media. So he wrote exactly what the middle class wanted to read, and it was fantastic, of course. The fathers of the English novel were Daniel Defoe, and he introduced the realistic novel, Jonathan Swift, the utopian novel, Samuel Richardson with the epistolary novel, which is a new entry again in the world of literature, Henry Fielding, the picaresque novel, and Lawrence Sterne, the anti-novel novel. Okay, the utopian novel, as you probably know, is the novel set in a utopistic world, which is better than the one we have, the world of dream. The epistolary novel is the novel based on the use of letters. The picaresque novel is the novel talking about travel, journey. Okay, so the main protagonist travels everywhere, and Lawrence Stern, the anti-novel novel, because it talks about it was destroyer of the idea of the novel. It was against this idea, the perfect idea of the novel. I didn't tell you anything about the realistic novel because we are going to talk more about that. Which was the novelist aim, because in this period we have for the first time the aim of the novel. What is the aim? Lo scopo. Okay, what I want to do with a novel, writing a novel. The first aim was to be understood by most people, by as many people as it could. So in order to write, to be understood by many people, the writer, the novelist, had to write in a simple way. So the language is very simple, very colloquial, not elevated, not Aulic style. Realism. The novelist wanted to show reality, okay? Of course, it is a reality, the idea, the concept of realism is different from the one we have nowadays, because realism at that time was not in the kind of life presented, but in how it was presented. It means that if I gave details about the reality I presented, the situation I presented, it could be considered reality. I will give you more details later about this idea of realism. Another important element was speed and copiousness, because as the writer, being a writer was a job, they had to earn money from their job, and so the artists wrote a lot. What was important was to be very quick in writing. And if you have a look at for example, the novels that Daniel Defoe wrote, you can see that they are quite a lot. Because even if we just know, for example, Robinson Crusoe and maybe Moll Flanders, he actually wrote really a lot of novels very quickly. The characters, the hero was of course a burgess and self-made man and self-reliant. Why? Because as I told you, the hero and the writer wanted to represent reality, and the middle class readers wanted to read about themselves, and they wanted to see that the hero was just like them, a burgess, a middle class hero. And as most of the middle class people were self-made and self-reliant, they wanted to see that the hero too was a self-made man and self-reliant. Self-made che si è fatto da solo, self-reliant che ha fiducia in sé. This was fundamental because people in this period had this idea. They were self-made men, because most of them became rich and changed their social condition thanks to their attempt, to their work, to their skills. and self-reliant, because it was important to be self-reliant, to have to believe, to trust in themselves. The hero was also the mouthpiece of the author, and the author was the mouthpiece of the reading public. So the hero was the mouthpiece of the reading public. So the hero was, we can say, as a normal middle class man. So that the reader, as there was this kind of identification between the hero and the reader was expected to sympathize with him. So the reader supported the hero in his adventures. All the characters, we were talking about reality. Well, realism was based on details, and details, for example, were the names of the characters. The names had to be contemporary names and surnames, because it was easier to believe in the realism of the story if the characters had real possible names and surnames. And they wanted to see all the other characters. They had to be involved in a struggle for the social success, because in this period the social success was the main objective, final objective of everyone. The narrative technique were, of course, different from the past. We have for the first time the first-person narrator in Daniel Defoe and Samuel Richardson. We have the third-person narrator in Harry Fielding. And as pattern, so as kind of novels, we have autobiographies. Fictional means fittizie, finte, autobiographies, as in Daniel Defoe, for example, Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders. We have letters in the epistolary novel with Samuel Richardson, Pamela or The Virtue Rewarded, and we have the mock epic style in Fielding. The setting, we have a new, the setting is realistic, of course, and what is different from the past is the chronological sequence of events. The events are presented in a chronological succession. So yesterday and today and tomorrow and so on, at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. So there were no changes in the time sequence, no differences. The references, we have references to particular times of the year of the day or of the day, because it was fundamental to give details about these things, in order to make the story real, okay? And for example, in Robinson, I can start reading the novel, reading, I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York. So you see the first person narrator is here, sorry, back, no. Okay, the first person narrator here. We have the exact year in which he was born and the city in which he was born. Then we have also specific references to names of places, countries, towns, streets, and these were fundamental for the idea of realism. And also detailed descriptions, because they considered the detailed descriptions as a symbol, as the element defining realism. The themes, we have real life, as we can imagine, and all the events that could alter a social status, in particular marriages, for example, and also fundamental the idea of reward and punishment, because this was typical of the Puritan middle class. So in the novels of this period, we find an accentuated idea of a reward if you have been nice, if you did the right thing, and punishment if you were bad, if you did the wrong thing. Compensa e punizione. Okay, that's all.